Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Gay with God podcast. You're here with Midge Noble, and I have a guest for you today. I know, yay! I know you guys love it when I have somebody that will talk other than myself. And so I have Sean Harvey with me today, and I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about himself, and then I'm going to honor his story. So, Sean, welcome to the Gay with God podcast, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Philadelphia. These days I do a lot of work in what I like to call hypermasculine systems. And being able to work with those right of center to extreme right and getting the message out to them and inviting them onto their soul journey.
Hmm.
But my journey really started probably when I was about 15 when I came out. And it was a very easy coming out with my mother. She said, "Yeah, sometimes you're gay, sometimes you're straight. You happen to be gay. I love you anyway. Get out of my face." It's pretty much the quotation. Um, and within a year of coming out, I started the first gay and lesbian youth group for the city of Dayton, Ohio, back in 1989, 1990. So before it was cool, hip, and trendy to
Hmm.
get. And that organization now supports about 80 youth at any one time through PFLAG, serving all of Southwest Ohio, from Columbus to Cincinnati over to the Indiana border.
Wow. So when you started that, what was the reaction? I mean, did it take off right away, or did it struggle, or did you get
I was,
pushback?
it was my senior year in high school. So, we started small. We
Hmm.
had the support of a gay activist organization in Ohio, in Dayton, called Serenity Inc. And so they provided funding and space. By the time, over the months that I started it, probably had about 12 people come in.
Hmm.
And then I turned the leadership over when I went off to college. Um, and they moved it forward. And then, they brought the right people in, and it really evolved into a more formalized organization with background checks for facilitators
Hmm.
and really being able to be supportive. But I really started it because I was sneaking into gay bars at like 16 and watching other guys who were about my age being, taken advantage of by older guys. I said,
Hmm.
is there a safe space for us to just come out
Hmm.
where we're not being taken advantage of? And so that was my motivation.
Yeah. Wow, that was brilliant. I mean, for you at that age to have that foresight to know that something could be started and
Mhm.
that you had the chutzpah, as they say, to do it. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So do so look, I may jump around a little bit because my brain is scattered today, but thinking of that now and looking back at what you did at 15, 16, and then how the world is beginning to go backwards,
Mhm.
and that our community, especially our young community, who is so used to being out, it's just like, not that they don't still struggle and not that we don't need to support them because not all families are embracing them. But are you worried at all about whether or not those types of programs are going to be axed by the current administration?
Well, I think so many programs are at risk, not just
Mm-hmm.
those programs. And so,
Mm-hmm.
do I worry? I think I'm more of a pragmatist.
Mm.
I just expect that things are going to fall off,
Ah.
worrying about it, but also knowing the spirit of the human spirit,
Mm.
that in these times people rally, people come together, people
Mm.
co-create what's next. Is I
Yeah.
think we're in as systems are crumbling around us, we're in a time where innovation is going to be strong, the arts are going to be strong, people are going to mobilize. But I don't think it's going to look like it did in the 60s. I don't think it's going to look like what we had even a year, 2 years, 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to and has to be different.
Mm.
They have to, I think, especially those on the left and those who are in queer community, have to break out maybe in some of our purest thinking to
Mm-hmm.
get really creative for what's actually going to work, as opposed to what we idealize will work.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Yes. And do you have some vision about that?
No.
Not yet.
Well, no, it's not that I just don't operate from a place of vision these days,
Yeah.
because I am so in the liminal and emergent space that I don't even try to
Mm.
understand what the divine has in store. Because no matter what I would come up with as a vision will never be what the potential is from connection to divine creator.
You are so right. You are so right. That's why I love talking to you because you're very grounded in your belief and you're grounded in what you're called to do. And you may not know the end destination, but you know you're going and you're all in and you're ready to do it from the very beginning, even though all the pieces aren't put together. And that's amazing. So, um, as you started out as a youth and you started this organization and then you went on to college, you said that your mom was the one that just said, okay, fine, get
Right.
out of my face. What about your dad? How did he take that?
I came out to him when I was 27 because we never really saw each other, and it really, to me, it didn't feel like it mattered that I had to come out with to him. So when I did, but we did stop talking for about 14 years after I came out to him. So,
Wow.
um, in the beginning, the first chapter of my book, the introduction to my book, is really the way we reconciled in his last year of life,
Hmm.
and what the power of love and the choice and agency we take when we bring love in the hardest of circumstances versus following to fear or grievance or resentment.
Hmm.
So I knew when my father didn't accept me, but we were having this opening, I am good at seeing the opportunity of building a bridge. And I really had my own coming to Jesus conversation. And I said, all right, so do I want to lean into love or do I want to stay in resentment? Which do I choose?
Mm.
And I chose love, and that totally transformed our relationship by
Hmm.
showing up in that way. And it also proved to me what is the power of love in these times.
Hmm.
And so I can work with who I work with because I am capable of, tapping into love and seeing the humanity in the person, even if we adamantly disagree, even if
Hmm.
they might harm me or want harm for me because of what I represent.
Hmm.
And so how do I still love them in the face of that?
Right.
You know?
And how does that look from your perspective? How do you love the people for yourself? How do you put that loving energy out there to people who want to tear you down or stop you from doing what you're doing?
But see, no one ever tries to stop me from what I'm doing. I mean, it's interesting. In the
Hmm.
8 years that 8 to 10 years I've been on this path, no one has ever tried to stop me doing this. Where I get the cynical questions are actually from gay progressives.
Hmm.
I often say it's sometimes easier to go into a room of extremists than it is to go into a community of gay men.
Ah, why do you think that is?
Because I think I think one, in our community, there's a lot of wounding
Mm,
and a lot of fear.
hmm.
And I don't think it feels energetically different when I walk into those spaces. And I also know I have a job to do in those other spaces as to being part of a community,
Hmm.
right? And I think it's for what I do, it can be hard for someone to grasp how I could do it, what I do. Um, and sometimes it's, well, why aren't you putting energy into, say, the trans community or for our community? It might because there's a lot of people already doing that.
Hmm.
But very few people can actually do and are capable of doing what I'm able to do. And so I just know that that's my calling, that's my soul calling.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm able to create headway in those
Mm-hmm.
spaces. And I think from a queer gay perspective, I think there's also with a lot of these men, there is a lot of I should say the men who are more right of center to extreme right. There's a lot of repressed sexuality
Mm-hmm.
that I'm able to help tap into, help them explore, help them look at, where they may be living a straight life or have bought in and led a straight life, what they're actually able to do when they're able to look at the things within themselves they're most shameful or fearful to look at or
Mm-hmm.
that have been repressed. And so I think there's power in that healing for those
Mm-hmm.
guys.
So tell folks who are listening more about your soul journey and what you're being called to do. What is it exactly that you do for folks?
Yeah. So my I was a Wall Street guy, worked on Wall Street as a consultant. Left on my 40th birthday because I had just had enough of
Mm-hmm.
that life. Went to work and within 2 weeks of resigning, an opportunity came along at Eileen Fisher, the fashion company. And in that role, I was able to um, do a lot of my own personal transformation work. And I ultimately became the head of personal transformation and well-being for the company. And in doing so, started noticing how men were being transformed through the feminine and through an
Mm-hmm.
organization that was 83% women and fully embraced a compassionate, spacious, creative culture.
Mm-hmm.
What did that do for men? And it usually translated into, well, my wife said, I listen differently. I'm more patient. I stopped needing to be right all the time. I started to be more curious. I'm more comfortable in the gray. I have more access to my emotions. I'm different. I tap into my creativity differently, and I'm able to solve problems in new ways. And ultimately, everyone said, and I am more comfortable in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you know what? For the 200 men in this company, we have to bottle that up and take it out into the world. And that's what
Yes.
I've done. And so also at Island Fisher, they sent me to an artist commune for 5 months in Canada. And that's where I got the call to work with men. Now I had left Wall Street, so I'd never have to work with men again. And that's when I knew um, it was a spiritual calling. And I was told at the artist commune, the room can only go as deep as the facilitator is capable.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you really look at my work, it's not necessarily what I do, it's the depths and breadth that I can hold that is different than most.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to seminary, became an interfaith minister to hold the soul healing work for men, wrote a book. As I graduated seminary, after 2 days after saying my vows as an interfaith minister, um, I got the call to work with police. Police led to working with military, starting to encounter and engage with white nationalist hate group extremists, and noticed that I actually kind of knew what I was doing and they could hear me. And, I was able to have openings and they would often say, I find you non-threatening and feel safe opening up. And I'm like, that's the only window I need. And I started to push aside my past work of social justice or, gender equity or feminist approaches to the work to really just be able to be present without an agenda for these men because I had a window that if I brought any of that in, it would shut.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I needed to not lose my values and beliefs, but to put them in my back pocket so that wasn't what I led with that I wasn't operating from rightness or righteousness to wrong them, but I could really be with them in the realities of who they are, to witness and see them for who they are, and also to sit with them in their suffering, knowing that the beliefs that they held were leading to a life of suffering. And so my work is often about, you know, going into the places where a lot of these guys work, hypermasculine, male-dominated power centers of power and being able to be support for these men through any number of initiatives or interventions, helping organizations think about how they engage men differently. And then also I lead men's soul adventures. And so working with faith communities around how do you engage men from a place of church without walls especially as the continual decline of men in faith community,
Hmm.
finding alternative creative ways to bring men back to spirituality, into spiritual connection, spiritual community, or faith.
Mm. I love that approach because I think you're absolutely right that if you go in with your beliefs in front of you, if there's any pushback in their soul, they're going to use that as resistance.
Right.
And as you come in, kind of like not low, but in that gentle way of just being supportive and listening first. I think that's beautiful. And it's very hard, I think, for anybody to do that consistently,
Right.
but especially for males who have not been able to have that ability to learn that,
Right.
that they've been taught to be super masculine, super macho, hide the feelings, you know, use the bronze, not the heart, the soul, or the brains necessarily. That's amazing.
And I think the advantage of being a gay queer man in the spaces, or for those of us who identify in that way, we've grown up seeing the world differently.
Hmm.
So we can also see men differently from maybe how they see themselves or what they're used to or accustomed to. Seeing um not just seeing oppression, but also just how we experience the masculine feminine, how we experience um, you know, the different dimensions of emotionality and compassion and creativity that can be supportive for these men in ways that, when they can hear it, when they can receive it, they're able to, you know, have a different experience. I remember I was on a podcast once and I opened up with, yeah, I'm a queer progressive New Yorker. And the guy that was the host was like, but Sean, I'm an evangelical Christian conservative Republican in Montana. How are we going to do this? And I said, well, we just named it, so why don't we jump in? And at the end of the conversation, he's like, yeah, man, I don't know what you did, but I've shared more with you on this podcast than with any other guest I've ever had on this podcast. And when I go back to that, it really, I think, comes down to open-hearted, non-judgmental curiosity.
Hmm.
And I know it's so hard for people to one, hold that grounded neutrality. It's hard for folks, especially folks in our community who are operating either from fear or that, working with folks who in most circumstances would want to do harm to our community.
Hmm.
And at the flip side, there's an opportunity and an opening when we push through those fears to be able to just really be present, and understand that those views uh, can come from just deep-seated fears, constricted reality.
Hmm.
In my
Hmm.
book, I talk about part of men's healing the wounded masculine, sexism, and internalized homophobia, which I call the trifecta of constriction for men. And it's like I can't be gay, can't be called a fag, can't be, I'm afraid. I'm the fears that we have, they just
Hmm.
like from boyhood just start to constrict,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
And the flip side of it is, yeah, I think it's the opportunity to have compassion for those who aren't able to kind of see it.
Mm.
I know my ex, and then to add one more layer to the mix of my story. So my last boyfriend was ultra conservative MAGA conspiracy theorist. And in the 9 months that we were together, and living in his world in the far right echo chamber, I was able to really have a better sense of the deep-seated fears, the unrealistic expectations that he put on himself,
Mm.
ways he was suffering, that I was able to one, really be with his suffering without trying to fix it,
Hmm.
but understand it. Two, to understand the deep-seated fears beneath the anger, the rage, and the hate and the grievance.
Mm.
And that, yeah, these views can be paralyzing for so many men.
Hmm.
And it really kind of opened my eyes also to when I talk about extremism. I kind of look at it in three lenses. One, those who have been radicalized to extremist ideology, and that can be on the left or the right and the left.
Yes.
It's one. It's a when you hold a view with such conviction that you can't see any other way, and you hold it so deeply
Mm,
with rightness and righteousness, and there's very much a black and white thinking in it.
mhm,
There's an opportunity to get curious. Um, and the next group are those who, are on the path to radicalization but don't even know it, which is like my ex-boyfriend didn't realize.
mm,
But the views were so extreme that he was already on the path.
mhm,
Our first disagreement was on slavery.
mm.
Our second disagreement was that he thought all trans people should be killed.
Oh,
And so holding these really extreme views in a mild manner, dude. And that's where I just have a different perspective. I'm like, this is much bigger than we think. And what we hear in the DEI tables versus what we hear at the kitchen table can be two very different realities.
yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that contributes to where we are in some of our deeply polarized, ways. And then the last way I see the group is those who are vulnerable to radicalization, men, young men, and boys, it's very easy to fall victim, to
Mhm,
fall to through loneliness combined with social media algorithms, combined with, you know, the externally focused promises that within that are often, if it's MMA fighting, if it's these different types of communities that can actually be bringing a particular type of dogma.
mhm,
And then the last thing and I'll be teaching a course at American University called Men, Masculinity, and Extremism. And one of the things we're going to look at is the influence of faith on extremist behavior,
mm,
on men that lead to extremist behavior. And so it's also when we're holding, faith from a place of deep dogma. An evangelical Christian church can get 1,000 guys to come out to a men's revival. It doesn't play out in the same way on the right, on the left.
right.
Right. So what are the ways in? Now I created something back when I lived in DC called Men's Soul Adventures DC. And when I launched it, we had, I didn't know how many guys were going to show up or how many guys were
Mhm.
going to sign up. And within the first 24 hours, 52 men signed up.
Wow.
Within 3 months, 180 men. I went to four other cities as an experiment. Four other cities as an experiment, and 100. We went from 180 to 330 men. I started asking these guys, so why soul adventure? And so a third of them said, I just want a different type of adventure. But that need to be connected to nature was so important.
Mm,
Second group was really focused, they were saying, I just want deeper connection and more real talk with other men. But it was the third group that I thought was interesting, which was they just had they just had questions about faith and spirituality,
yeah.
and also how to um, just understand more about different faiths is also from what they learned growing up from faith. How does that apply to modern day living?
Hmm.
And so I started coining the term. I'm like, a lot of guys are just seeking practical spirituality, as I like to call it now, practical spirituality for dudes.
And was the target audience gay, straight, a
It was
combination?
it was just everyone.
Just any man could sign up.
Yeah.
Hmm. Wow. So I think the stereotypes for men, especially for men, gay or straight, has been really, really difficult to break down, and it continues to be repopulated by you know the expectations in the media, the expectations in and what they're taught in their homes and what they're taught by society and how it all measures up.
Right.
So that kind of a journey makes me believe that men want more of that than they have ever been allowed to reach for.
It's interesting, the way I describe it is, I sit with men, I meet men in their suffering, I
Hmm.
listen for their yearning, and I offer hope in the midst of both. I think
Hmm.
that's my number one job as a minister,
Hmm.
as a faith leader. But second, but we have to do it in a way that's not emasculating or victimizing.
Right.
And so I was actually just giving a guest lecture over the weekend, and I modeled and demoed a men's circle in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, the guys were like, you treated us like men. You didn't like bring this feminine approach
Mm-hmm.
to the work. And I'm like, I know. They're like, you just he's like, I know I can tell you work with cops and military the way you held it, but like you didn't make us over process our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You just allowed us to just show up and just bring what we needed to bring.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I've found is that in a lot of this work, we either do two things, and I'm kind of trying to create the third. So the first is we'll bring a hyper masculine approach because we believe we have to meet men in their masculine so that they can feel something. So we're going to beat it out of them until they feel, it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the flip side is in a lot of conscious community, we're going to go to the divine feminine, but we forget there's a masculine or we've demonized the masculine. And so guys stay in the healing of the feminine, but they forget to come back into their masculine,
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my belief is we need to come into our full integration so we can be more human.
Mm-hmm.
And that means honoring and respecting and loving the masculine,
Mm-hmm.
realizing, accepting, and elevating the feminine so we can come into true integration. And if people don't like that language, it's a polarity. Like we
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we get so caught up in language
Mm-hmm.
that especially for that it's like, okay, push, pull, push, active, receptive, yin and yang, whatever you want to call it, there's a polarity. And the reality is when we're out of balance with those polarity, question for me is not right or wrong, good or bad. Question for me is cost and benefit.
Mm-hmm.
What have been the benefits for your imbalance? But more and most importantly, what's been the cost to you? What have you not had in your life that you most desire because you haven't had access to it because you didn't have access to the suppressed energy, emotion, and this part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to come into the fullness of all of you, especially for men, and I apply this to straight men, extremist men, gay men, queer men, fluid, sexually fluid men, whatever it is, however you define, just to ask yourself, how am I balanced and what in what ways may I be out of balance?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So
I I would love to know if any of the really extremist men that you've worked with had any pushback when when you disclose that you are a gay man. Do you name who you are, or do you just go in as just a presenter?
I think I always disclose my sexuality, but I never disclose it. I typically and rarely, or I rarely disclose it up front.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very matter of fact about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not even like a thing. It's like, I was dating this guy, or my ex-boyfriend who was extremist, or it's
Uh-huh.
so it's, but you've also gotten a chance to get to know me. You've gotten a chance to, I'm already, when I tell them, I'm probably also going to challenge their own assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
and so to me, I'm very strategic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And at the same time, as a man, does it really matter what my sexual orientation is, right? If I'm doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so so I always ask myself, what is my intention for disclosing my sexuality versus just being another man who is really here to support and care for another man. So I'm not holding any agenda. I'm not,
Right.
again, I think we can get so caught up in pursuing an agenda it can deflect from what we're actually
Mm-hmm.
trying to do.
Yeah.
And flip side of it is, what might create a wall versus what's going to create a bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the day, my intention is, you know, what is ultimately most important. And
Mm-hmm.
I am the least important part of the equation,
Mm-hmm.
right? When
Yeah.
I'm facilitating groups, when I'm working with men, my stuff is the least important and least significant. It's how do I hold space for the person in front of me
Mm-hmm.
so that they can really be seen, heard, valued, and they can have and in my presence for them then mirrors back a reflection of their own humanity. And I think that's what we do for each other. I think we mirror each other's humanity to each other, and our differences, our distinctions provide and plant seeds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when people ask me, so what's the transformation, Sean? Like, when is it? I'm like, you're asking the wrong questions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're really asking, you're taking a training-based, outcome-focused orientation. And this is personal transformation, liminal space in the emergent. In my conversations with these guys, I'm just planting seeds. They'll probably never forget the conversation that we had, right? And at the same time, it's not for me to decide how those seeds are germinating,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my piece is I'm just contributing to something bigger. So I'm not getting caught up in my own ego or my own savior complex because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
here to save this person. I'm
Mm-hmm.
here to be a model of something and a vessel of the divine light that's able to be and planting a seed for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, as my seed is planted, other people will plant seeds. And when this person is ready in their own divine timing, the divine will move them forward in their transformation or
Right.
invite them into a realization. I don't have that control.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things we also have to be realistic about. This is where we're really talking about we are connecting soul to soul. We're connecting spiritually, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to my humanness is having this magnificent, control. I'm like, I want control here. It's just that, I've been guided, they've been guided to me, and we were meant to have this conversation
Mm-hmm.
so they can hear whatever message that the divine wants them to have for the
Right.
healing, transformation, and discovery.
And as a pastor, as a faith leader, you know that no matter what your intention is to put out to a group, every individual person is going to take something that they need, whether you said it or not, or said
Right.
it in that way, because that's the way it is even in a congregation. And the minister gives the same sermon to everybody,
Right.
and then in the meet and greet afterwards, thank you so much for saying that particular thing that they may not have even said, but that's what they needed to hear. And so everybody also has their own agency as far as when they filter things, they filter it through the lens that they need.
Right, exactly. And it's there's often the pushback I do get at times is why are you only focused on men and not everybody else?
Really?
I get that. And I said, well, I worked, I mean, I've pretty much been surrounded by women in everything I've done for so long. You don't need another white guy telling women how to do their personal transformation.
Absolutely not.
Right?
Right.
That's first. And second, and second, women have way more access to personal transformation, both just based on their makeup
Mm,
and what society has allowed. So men are often facing stigma,
mm-hmm,
facing availability and access.
mm-hmm,
And so often men just don't realize what's available because they don't know about it and they don't often have access because there's very few resources.
mm.
And maybe what they see is like, okay, we're going to go out in the woods, we're going to get naked, we're going to beat drums, and we're going to, howl
Scream.
like werewolves or something. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's part of this, but that's not the
Mm-hmm,
only way we can express it.
mm-hmm,
And I think, in faith community, it's also how to meet men where they meet men in the ways that they can receive this. And so, but when I do give a talk or a sermon for a mixed gendered audience,
mm.
I mean, I have things that other people don't have, which is I worked at Eileen Fisher, so I can always talk about working at a women's fashion company, led me to this work, um, and being able to relate that at the end of the day, this is a human conversation. These are, looking at our unmet needs.
Mm-hmm,
And that as humans, we are all wounded, but this is giving particular attention to the wounds of men that are often ever talked about
mm-hmm.
or never talked about.
So as you're talking, and I keep coming back to your ex and how polar opposites you might have been at that time. and going in that echo chamber as you described it. The Describe for me how you sat in that, how you were able to be so different as far as like your own understanding of humanness and your understanding of compassion and knowing that, like all trans people need to be killed. I mean, tell me how you emotionally, cognitively did that in that loving
Right.
space.
So, I mean, I think like once I would get past the shock of certain statements,
Yeah.
and I'm like, well, I mean, what's here? And I think there's, I had done enough inner work that, one, I knew he wasn't a violent man. I knew
Mm,
that these were just views.
hmm
And I was able to really challenge myself. How do I love the man and love the humanity of the man and see the humanity of the man while disagreeing or adamantly disagreeing or being repulsed by the views,
hmm
right?
hmm
And so I think a couple of things. One, when you really look at so many of these guys, they love their family, they love their country,
hmm
they love their dogs, I mean, there's a lot of humanity that they have.
hmm
And we really understand the story of so many men, the trauma of becoming a man, the trauma of letting go of play, creativity, connection, the fears, and then what's happening to accelerate. That I just started to distinguish the humanity of the man and the views of the man are two different things, and the views are not a reflection of their humanity, but something else,
hmm hmm
right? And so I saw this, my ex had some amazing qualities and was a really good guy in a lot of ways, in respectful ways, who just happened to have some really extreme views. And so where do those views come? So as opposed to judging the views, I got curious,
hmm
what is the internalized homophobia that he's experiencing?
hmm
And as he came out later in life, what is he still holding?
hmm
You know? How has he felt like an outsider to the gay community?
hmm
And just trying to reconcile that. And
hmm
so again, it's for me, and what I would encourage everyone is to, look past the views, because the views are not necessarily the reflection of who they really are.
hmm
And to have the courage to be curious about, so where did this come from? Um, and to also appreciate the good that this person represents.
hmm
And I think this plays out for so many when I talk to especially queer folks, gay folks, um, all folks in our folks in our community, and it often comes back to a family member. It's like, okay, because let's talk about from the family member who you're not going to break up with, but
hmm
you might have some challenges. What choices do you make? Lean into love, stay in resentment, be estranged.
hmm
And we have agency around those choices,
hmm
but I think it's hard, especially when it's like, say, your father,
Yeah.
right? It's like you know the parts of your father that you love, even if you can't stand some of their views.
hmm
So like let that be like a sort of a learning lab of what if you try something different,
hmm
as opposed to trying to change their views.
Yeah, which is not helping.
It's it's also how do we learn if we can humanize each other to coexist?
hmm
And then if we can hear those views. And so with my ex, I said to him up front, I'm like, look, I'm not here to change your political views. I don't really care. Like that, this is not my job
hmm
to change you. And so I'm not here to change you. But the anger with which you hold those views, I am going to get curious about, and I probably will call you out. What's the anger about that you hold those views? And so in 9 months, we went from rage-filled, almost violent conversations at times to civil, emotion-free conversations around politics by the end.
Wow.
And so being able to move that we could really hear each other. And so I think there's something in that when we can hear and then we can have reasonable, rational conversations around the policy points, the issues that we disagree upon.
Mm. That's a beautiful world.
Well,
To be able to do that. I'm serious. I mean, that's because you have the skills to sit there compassionately and you are, like you said, you're evolved enough and you've worked through your stuff enough to be able to see it so clearly.
right,
And that's why I was digging deeper in that because that's a clarity that a lot of people don't have,
right,
myself included sometimes. I don't have the clarity always to be able to look past what
right.
they're trying to do.
Mhm.
And it's not always just them. I mean, it's anyone who looks at somebody and says they need to be killed or all of them need to go, or we're going to do this and it's going to affect this many people.
Yeah,
That's knowing that we're repeating part of our history and people can't be awake to see it happening is frustrating to me. And yet I feel powerless because it's not my job to fix them or to change them. Um, so it is one of those things, not just for our community, but for our humanity,
right,
for our democracy. It's a hard time to be patient because we see such urgency in
right.
that. Does that make sense?
Mhm. And so but I think we're in a different paradigm right now.
Hmm.
What worked 5 months ago and what works now, the rules are changes, the guardrails are off,
Yes.
and there's a lot of unknowns. And so I think first, how do we stay grounded so we're not reacting and we're responding,
Hmm.
right? That if we lose touch of our own humanity, that's probably one of the worst things we can lose.
Yes.
And so if we can bring humanity even to those who would do us harm, and then to engage in a humanizing conversation, it is often in those exchanges that points of view can be shifted, but without trying to shift them, to just being ourselves, being in our full humanity,
Hmm.
and coming not from a place of adversary, but a place of bridging.
Mm.
And hearts and minds do shift,
Hmm.
right? But often we are operating in a very different approach that the other person. I often say, we can talk if we're in progressive circles, our language can't be heard on conservative ears and
Hmm.
vice versa. So how do
Hmm.
we learn to translate so we can hear each other? How do we have our own relaxation of our egos so that maybe I need to try something different?
Hmm.
What is my intent? Is my intent to argue and be right?
Mm.
Or is my intent to build a bridge to someone who may be holding a view, but we have to think about this from a place of complexity.
Hmm.
People and humans are complex.
Hmm.
It becomes very easy to say, you're in this category, so you fit all these qualities.
Hmm.
And what I find is when I don't take that approach and I honor the complexity of the person and
Hmm.
all their views and all their dimensions, and they can feel seen in their complexity,
Hmm.
there's an opening,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And if you were to go through, I mean, it was funny because over the course of my relationship, I'm like, you're a liberal on this one, aren't you? And then I would say, and I'm a conservative on this one over here.
Uh-huh.
I think the reality is we're not, you know, hook, line, and sinker,
Hmm.
progressive or conservative for the most part.
Hmm.
We are complex beings who see the issues based on our view, but they don't always have to be uniform. It doesn't, I am not all of these things,
Hmm.
And so when we can see each other in our complexity and build upon the things where we see the good, it makes it easier when we have to address the things where we disagree or that we find um, repugnant from our own value set.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, your work is so important. I just feel like it's not just your soul calling, but I understand that this is something that the whole world needs. So, especially at this point, to be able to sit in that space. And I really appreciate your vision about that. I appreciate your ability to sit in awkward spaces and always strive for the love and
Mm.
the humanity. That is a true calling, and I think it's because you have that calling that you're able to do it as well as you do it. Not that other people can't do it.
Right.
We would hope that other people could do it, but your calling is just so poignant right now, and it's needed so much more than you're probably able to even give it at this point because there's only one of you.
Yeah, so that's why I continue to try to find ways to build capacity for more folks, more men and
Yes.
women to be able to do what I do.
Yeah.
And so when I often I say that, when I look for someone that I want to either train up,
Mm-hmm.
a facilitator, I say, I look for the stomach, the will, the skill, and the cred.
Mm,
Do you have the stomach to work across ideological difference?
mm-hmm.
Do you have the will and the passion to say, by starting with healing men, we can start to heal society because the place that has the least healing is often men in these spaces,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then to have the skill to be able to work with personal transformation among men, to understand masculinity and its positives and deficits, to be able to work with groups, and then also to be able to work in systems and in
Mm-hmm.
male-dominated systems and
Mm-hmm.
and then last, the cred. Do you have the credibility to stand in front of these groups and be taken seriously as
Mm-hmm.
someone? And that's kind of, and becomes a much smaller picture of who's able to do this. But the
Uh-huh.
question becomes less who's able to do this and who has an interest and a passion for doing this and know that this is part of what's needed for the bigger picture,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And when folks, I often say to my folks and friends who've been in the DEI space, however that's evolving, my work, I often say my work is the precursor to your work. In
Mm-hmm.
our pursuit of social justice and righting injustices, we've often forgotten about the human condition and the male ego,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to bring men along in a different way, to include men along in a different way, to engage them in a different way, that is that's where a lot of my work is around how do we think more strategically about how to engage men differently
Mm-hmm.
to counter resistance, to counter pushback, to create more engagement and support um, for initiatives that are going to contribute to, organizational and societal transformation and shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Which I do think is going to come from as oppressive models are breaking down in front of our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
This is no longer about trying to rebuild on outdated models. This is about
Mm-hmm.
reimagining from deeper consciousness and collective wisdom. And the ability to have a multimodal approach in this that blends, contemplative work, somatic work, creative work, systems thinking
Mm-hmm.
work, and the ability to really move transformation through the lens of compassion and deeper humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And often what I find is when I work with anyone across the political continuum, when I shift from any of the outgoing language and just speak from a place of shared humanity or deeper humanity, more and more people I find are receptive to that concept because I'm guessing that their soul is feeling that in a way,
Mm-hmm.
even if their mind doesn't understand or their logic doesn't understand why they're gravitating to it. There's an energy about it that I
Mm-hmm.
think is inviting them in.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I could listen to you for hours. Absolutely hours. So real quickly, I know we're getting close to the time, but and I would like to have you back to talk more about your book and the metamorphosis of that. But tell folks a little bit about your book and what they can expect.
It's pretty simple. My first book that I published in 2023, it's called Warrior Compassion: Unleashing the Healing Power of Men. And it really provides a roadmap for men's soul healing as a catalyst for systems change, and tells the plight of men today and their wounding, my story of transformation, which is 2 chapters. But really, the majority of the book is just, from my conversations, from my journey, my conversations with other men who've been on their journeys, what is sort of a roadmap that can be helpful for men to kind of think about their journeys differently.
Mm-hmm.
And then how we can, I started to lay some foundation at the end of the book on links to organizational systems. My book I'm starting to work on now, the working title is The Quiet Crisis: Men's Hidden Struggles in a Disconnected World.
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, oh, but we are connected. I'm like, we have the illusion of connection.
Mm-hmm.
We're also the loneliest we've ever been,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I want to move from faux intimacy to real intimacy in this work, and what happens to men in particular when they start becoming more connected and start healing those hidden struggles,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at what can happen if it's unattended to, and then look at what happens when we do start to take care and support our men in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I will put the link to your first book on the show page so folks can find it. And I'm sure there's a lot of men out there that are going to want to to read it and to look into what you're talking about, because it's so, so important. And I appreciate just being able to talk to you and see that it's possible. It is possible to be in this transformational time that we have and see it as a transformation that can actually bring us back to a place that we've never been, if that makes sense. That this kind of connection with each other only happens in spirit, usually. And so for us to be able to bring spirit to the forefront and say, this is how we're all human.
Right,
And no matter what we believe or where we fall in those beliefs, from extremists to whatever, that it is our souls
right,
that we really need to connect with and know how to treat each other from that loving place.
right,
And so when it all blows up, we have to recreate.
right,
And so that's the beauty of looking at things instead of seeing the devastation, seeing the possibility and how to recreate and
right.
how to come back to a more loving space.
Totally,
Yeah, moving forward.
totally. Yeah.
I appreciate you so very, very much. And if you're willing and able to come back at some point, I would love to have more conversations with you, because
Okay.
I think you're just a wealth of information and we just scratched the little tippy top. But I also know how busy you are, and we will be patient. So
Thank,
thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you very much.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, guys, and I want to thank you for always being great listeners and supporters and for continuing to share and subscribe to this podcast. Remember to check out our Facebook group, Gay with God, where we do a monthly group entitled My Faith Journey. And if you need support to help you come out and to go on your own faith journey, remember that you can always get a confidential appointment with me that is also complimentary, so that we can just get together and meet each other and see how we fit. And you can also do that at the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com, where we'll have all of the links that you can find Sean and his work and what he's doing. And if you think you had all the things that he talked about to be a facilitator, double check your facts, because it's going to be a high calling, but a very worthy calling. If you are listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in a relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, or not even sure if you're gay, God has always been within you, even when you didn't know it. You have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and share, 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 so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger.
Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.